This little light of mine, I'm gonna let it shine. Let it shine, let it shine, let it shine.
Hi friends, I'm Carrie Jo, and this is Holy Chuckles Podcast. This is a space for honest faith, lived experiences, and shining a light in the places we've learned to hide. I'm not here to explain faith. I'm here to live it out loud. So take a breath and let's make room for what's real. Welcome back to Holy Chuckles Podcast. I'm really glad you're here. Today I'm going into 1 Samuel chapter 2, verse 28 and 29. I chose your ancestors out of all the tribes of Israel to be my priest, to go up to my altar, to burn incense, and to wear an ephod in my presence. I also gave your ancestors' family all the food offerings presented by the Israelites. Why do you scorn my sacrifice and offering that I prescribed for my dwelling? Why do you honor your sons more than me by fattening yourselves on the choice parts of every offering made by my people of Israel? That's verse 28 and 29. And the longer I sat with these verses, the more uncomfortable I got. If I look back at my life, I've always followed some type of pattern. I couldn't see it then. I've only been able to recognize it because of where I'm at in my healing right now. One of the most obvious places that I followed patterns in my life were with the jobs that I've held. The companies that I worked for, a lot of them were fear-based companies. Maybe not fear in the way that we would normally envision it, but they were fear entangled in some type of way. Sometimes the company couldn't meet their payroll on time. Another company was performance based. Either way I looked at it, it was a different environment. It was a different presentation, but it was still the same fear. And what I understand now, it wasn't just the companies exuding fear, it was also me. I was operating from fear. In verse 27, God said, "How have I not made myself clear?" And God was very clear in many instances in my life. God gave me the signs. God gave me the nudges. God gave me the red flags. But I was the one who continued to follow those patterns. In verse 28, God specifically says, I chose your ancestors out of all the tribes of Israel to be my priest. God says, did I not choose you? Did I not appoint you? Did I not give you honor? And then verse 29, God says, why do you honor your sons more than me? God is saying, why are you honoring the wrong thing? When I read that now, I don't just see Eli. I see me. I see me because I was chosen. I was chosen over and over again in my career. God gave me opportunities. God gave me responsibility. God gave me leadership. But instead of receiving those things as something God entrusted to me, I turned them into something I had to prove. And my patterns didn't just keep me in companies that exuded fear. My patterns, they kept me from seeing my full potential. My patterns kept me blinded. My patterns kept me narrowing my options, my patterns, made me feel that fear was the only option. One of the first companies I started with was right out of high school. I had no experience. I didn't even know how to answer a phone. And in that company, because it was so small and because the services provided were so niche, there was always fear around payroll not being met. But we all still worked as if we were getting paid. And the expectation didn't change just because the company was struggling. I was young, I was eager, and I was ready to prove myself. And the owner of the company gave me a shot right out of high school. The only thing that I had going for me was a personality and a want to succeed. When I saw the pattern of the financial hardship in this company, it didn't even dawn on me to go get another job because I had such a difficult time finding this one. That was one of the patterns. Scarcity. Staying in that job felt like the responsible thing to do. As I've grown and looking back now through these verses, I can see something much deeper. What I didn't realize then, God had entrusted me with ability. That was that will or that want to succeed. God had entrusted me with a work ethic. God had entrusted me with leadership qualities. And God had already chosen me for opportunities that I wasn't even aware of. But instead of honoring what was sacred, instead of honoring what God gave me, which was my discernment, my peace, my growth, instead of honoring those, I honored security. I honored fear. And I honored those by staying at that job instead of having faith in myself, in my abilities, instead of having faith in the attributes that God had entrusted me with. I stayed. And when you stay long enough in fear, because that's exactly what it was fear that I couldn't get any better. It was fear that I wouldn't be hired somewhere else. So when you stay long enough in fear, fear starts to feel normal. I was hired at my next company, and looking back now, it's not shocking to see that it was a performance-based company. You had to hit a certain number each day or each month. And if you didn't, you felt it. You felt it in the emails. You felt it in the phone calls. You felt it in the meetings. And you felt it the way leadership talked to you. After being there for a while, the amount of dread that would come over me walking through those doors each morning, it was a different system than before. It was a different pattern, but it was still the same fear. The fear of not being able to pay my bills. The fear of not being able to support myself. And now I had a family. So now it was the fear of not being able to support my family. Same pattern as before. Same fear as before. Just wrapped up in a different presentation. And this is where verse 28 starts to get uncomfortable for me. Because God said it the first time. God said, "Did I not choose you? Did I not appoint you? Did I not give you honor?" God said it in the first job, and God was saying it here because I was being entrusted. I was being appointed. At this particular company, I had been hired as the facility manager. This was only my second job in my adult life. And quite honestly, I had no clue what I was doing when I first started. The things that I did know, I knew I was a workhorse. I knew I had a strong work ethic. I was a quick learner. And no matter what task was put in front of me, I would figure it out. This facility that I became manager over was one of the worst facilities in the company. I wasn't sure what to do at first, but I figured I would start with step one. And one of the first things that I knew was to reorganize, to clean, to try to bring order to the chaos that was at that facility. And the only way to do that was cleaning things out and making it anew. That center was a mess, but I was going to get it in order. As I was cleaning, I found the application that I had sent in, along with the regional's notes. The regional's notes were on a fact sheet that was clipped to the application. And the first sentence on that fact sheet, it was either I found the one or I found her. And I can remember when I read that sentence sticking with me because it wasn't about pride. It wasn't about honor. Like, yeah, you sure did find the one. It was pressure. It landed as pressure for me because now I had to prove that what she wrote was correct. I had to prove I was the one to run that facility. I had to prove that what she saw in me was accurate. It didn't even dawn on me. That sentence was choosing language. I was chosen. Verse 28 said, "Did I not choose you?" At that moment, in writing, with my own two eyes, I could see that I was chosen. But instead of receiving that as something entrusted to me, I turned it into something I had to earn. This team at this facility, along with myself, we worked our asses off at this facility. Every single one of us gave 150%. We took that center from being one of the worst to slowly climbing up the ranks. We worked day and night. We worked tirelessly. At this facility, we did MRIs. And I remember one day in particular, we had a great schedule that day. Like our books were filled. But that wasn't enough for me because I heard about a company record for the most MRIs done in one day by a single machine. And once I heard that, I was off and running because that's a way that I could prove my worth. That's a way that I could prove that regional chose the right person. So we were going to beat that company record. That day, we were there until midnight. And everything that could have gone wrong did. But I didn't see those challenges as stop signs. I saw them as little small hurdles. And once we made it over one hurdle, we celebrated and kept going. We scanned patients that day from 7 a.m. until midnight. And when I look back today, as much as corporate was cheering us on, something should have signaled in my brain that it wasn't about healthcare and that wasn't about patients. On corporate's end, it was about greed, number, and power. On my end, it was about proving that I was the right person for the job. And what's really uncomfortable, that regional did pick the right person because I was constantly trying to prove my worth. And when you are trying to prove your worth, you give more. You give more time. You give more energy. You sacrifice more. And when you give more, the people around you give more. So not only was I leading myself in the wrong way, I was leading my team in the wrong way. Because verse 29 says, why are you honoring the wrong thing? And at that time, I would have said I was honoring responsibility. I was honoring commitment. I was honoring what was expected of me. But in hindsight, I was honoring performance. I was honoring the title. I was honoring the validation of turning something around. We continued to work in that center tirelessly in the months ahead. They used to send out a goal sheet, and in that goal sheet, it would show you where you were in the ranks of each center. And we were slowly climbing those ranks. And it felt good. The accolades we were getting, we were on fire. But we couldn't do any of this without the referrals from our physicians. So we decided to spend a certain month's budget on an appreciation celebration for our referring physicians. We ordered appetizers, we gave out drink tickets, and people just kept coming in. We couldn't even keep a head count because so many people just kept coming in. By the time we were able to kind of count, we had made it to upward over 75, 80 people. And for something like this, that was a lot of people. We kept giving out drink tickets. We kept ordering appetizers. We kept celebrating. And by the end of the night, when the check came, we realized we just spent our whole marketing budget on this party. And it was the beginning of the month. My marketer and I, we kind of looked at each other, both of us probably seeing the dread in each other's eyes. And we laughed it off. And I said, well, we're going to have to give away bananas the rest of the month. And that's exactly what we did. We gave out bunches of bananas that said, we go bananas for your referrals. We laughed and we thought we were so creative. But underneath that laugh, underneath that creativity, we were scared because we went over our budget for this party and we spent our whole month budget on this party. A little while after that, I received a phone call from our HR director, and she said, hey, I'm coming to Dallas and I'm coming to celebrate you guys. Later in the day, my marketer was in the office and I was talking to him and the technologist, and I said, hey, keep this date open because the HR director's coming to celebrate us. And they both looked at me and we all had the same thought. We are in so much trouble. The days before HR director was coming into town, we made sure our numbers stayed up. We were doing everything we could think of to get out of being in trouble before we even knew if we were in trouble. This felt like my childhood all over again. The day came for our dinner. You could feel the tension in all of us. And instead of me being a leader and saying, of course we're not in trouble. How could we be in trouble? Yes, we spent that marketing budget, but you know what we did? We came up with a plan for the rest of the month and we followed through with it. And it was a great plan. Instead of leading my team and saying, we've just been blowing our goals out of the water for the previous months. We've been exceeding our goals by 20%. We have been on fire. I still allowed myself and my team to continue thinking we were in trouble because this was normal to me. Being in fear was normal to me. As the hour got closer to the time of dinner, we all started to get more antsy. We showed up at the restaurant Denise, the HR director from corporate, was already there. Denise had always been fantastic every time I interacted with her, and she gave off no vibes that we were in trouble. It wasn't her. It was us. We ordered dinner. Denise was her jovial self. We were the awkward ones. The whole first half of dinner was awkward. It got so awkward that Denise finally said, "What is going on? Why are you guys acting so weird?" I know none of us spoke for a minute. And then I finally said, "Okay, we thought you were coming here to chop off our fingers because of how much we spent at the last party we had." Denise had this contagious laugh. It's loud. It's inviting. And when we were engulfed in that laugh, the whole night shifted. And she said, "No, I really came to celebrate you guys." But the reactions that we had the days leading up to this dinner, and even that day, should have signaled to me that I was working in a fear-based company, that I was working from a fear-based place within inside myself. Because we literally couldn't even enjoy a celebration for us, because we were so afraid we had done something wrong. God said in verse 28, "Did I not choose you? Did I not appoint you? Did I not give you honor?" And we were being honored. And I can't speak for them. I can only speak for me. I couldn't even receive that honor because my nervous system was trained to brace for punishment. And at that time, I wouldn't have even began to understand verse 29. When verse 29 says, "Why are you honoring the wrong things?" Because I was honoring numbers. I was honoring performance. I was honoring not getting in trouble instead of honoring my team, the work we had been doing, and the moment Denise came to celebrate us. The dinner ended up being amazing. Denise was a joy to be around. In fact, we're still friends today. And still today, I lovingly refer to her as Guido. I talked about every morning when I came through those facility doors, how I dreaded it. I didn't even know my body was tensing up. But that's what happens when fear is the culture. And the deeper part of this is it wasn't just the culture in the company. It was the culture inside myself. Because even when I was chosen, even when I was celebrated, I still felt like I had to prove it. And that was a pattern for me. And if that story ended right there, I might be able to say I learned something. But I didn't, because I continued with the same pattern. The company that I was the facility manager for, it was bought out by a different company. In the old company, I had worked my way up to regional manager. And when the new company bought us, they continued to keep the field management. And I was super happy that I didn't have to go look for a new job. But I soon learned that this new company was the same fear-based leadership, just a different name. And as I read verse 29, I understood that I kept honoring the wrong thing. I kept honoring that same system. The only thing different was a new name. But during that time, I didn't even realize that's what I was doing. I thought it was growth. I thought it was loyalty. I thought it was opportunity. But it was the same tone, the same pressures, the same dread. The Texas sites I'd been over were running really great. They were like a well-oiled machine. But man, I was working day and night. And I was constantly in the middle of corporate and the centers, trying to appease corporate, trying to protect the centers, trying to make both sides happy, and trying to be the kind of leader I wish I had had. And I didn't even realize what that was doing to my body. My nervous system was on high alert all the time. It was working overtime trying to prove I could handle it. And verse 29 was just sitting there quietly asking, why are you honoring the wrong thing? But eventually my hard work proved itself, and I was asked to take on more responsibility and become the director of operations. And of course, I said yes. This was what I had been working for. This was my moment. This is what I wanted. I wanted to lead. I wanted to show great leadership. I wanted to give what I had not been given. I didn't even ask any questions. I just accepted the position. Verse 28 comes in again. Did I not choose you? Did I not appoint you? Did I not give you honor? Being asked to be the director of operations, I had been chosen again. I had been appointed again, but I didn't ask any questions. And I never stopped to ask what I was being entrusted with. I never took time to make sure they understood what my vision was, the type of leader I wanted to be. I just accepted it and assumed that I was going to be able to show a different style of leadership, to lead how I wanted to lead. But I was wrong. It was the same pattern, just wrapped up in a different package. And now I was part of that package because now I was making more money. Now my ego was being fed. Now my worth was being fed. And that is the uncomfortable truth of it. And the most uncomfortable truth is that it wasn't just fear inside me anymore. Now it was fear mixed with validation. It was fear mixed with status. It was fear mixed with being indispensable. And had I been reading verse 29 in that season, verse 29 would have asked me, what are you honoring right now? Every field employee worked their asses off for this company. We were working directors. Our regionals, they were working regionals. No one just sat at a desk and pushed papers. We were road warriors. We were in it with our centers and our staff. The most phenomenal people I have ever worked with in my life. They were like Chick-fil-A employees on steroids in healthcare. That's how good they were. If I opened up a company today, I would go find 90% of those people and hire them. Not just because of the skill they had, but because of the heart they had. They genuinely cared about the patients. They genuinely cared about their facility's reputation and the company's reputation. They cared about the service they were providing. And most of all, they cared about each other. And I think this is where verse 28 hits me probably the hardest out of everything, because God chose me to lead people of that caliber. God entrusted me with those people. It wasn't corporate that kept those doors open as long as they were open. It was all of us out in the field. We all took whatever corporate threw at us and we figured it out. They could give us anything and we were going to excel at it. And it wasn't just the fear-based pattern that was the same. It was also the pattern of protecting each other in the field, carrying chaos, holding it together. Different company, same pattern. And verse 29, it doesn't have to be shouted here. it just whispers to me, what were you honoring while you were carrying all of that? 2015 came around and I received a phone call that we would be shutting down some of the Texas centers or selling them. This decision was made without any warning. When that phone call came in, the employees had to be told. The owners and executives were not going to do this dirty job. It was left up to me and other leaders in the field. There were people I had worked with now for over 10 years that I had to let them know they would no longer have a job or they would be reporting to another company. This was heart-wrenching for me. But as always, I put on a brave face and I did what needed to be done. Telling those employees, giving them no warning, those were some of the worst days for me. And then on top of that, because I lived in Texas, I didn't know if I was going to have a job. But at this point, after letting people go or telling them they were moving to a different company, I didn't even care. I was so tired. My nervous system was shot. One of my close friends who was also a director, she called me and said, hey, the contracting and credentialing director quit. I threw your name in the ring for that position because you are so good at paying attention to detail. A couple hours later, my phone rang. It was my boss's number, probably the one person at that moment I really didn't want to talk to because I was so tired, so emotionally drained. I could have cared less about a job, but she told me to hang tight. They didn't know what they were going to do yet, but she didn't want me to leave. And she used the language that got me hooked. I think we have a job you'd be perfect for. Now I could prove my worth again. And this job that she was talking about, I didn't have credentials for. I didn't even know what the job really entailed. I really didn't even understand it. But by then, I had become a professional at proving my worth. And anything they threw at me, I was going to excel in. And if I had listened to verse 29 then, verse 29 would have asked me, are you honoring being chosen? Or are you honoring being needed? And I was honoring being needed because I accepted the position of contracting and credentialing director. And for a while, I enjoyed that position. I was primarily working alone. I was able to work from home. My nervous system got a little reset from being around people all the time. I was learning something new. It wasn't as numbers driven, and I wasn't being pushed as hard. I was building relationships, and I enjoyed that. I was building relationships with insurance companies, radiologists, vendors, and I started to feel balanced. I started to feel centered. But the company also felt that because I was very good at pushing numbers. I was very good at meeting goals. I was very good at proving my worth. And in this job, you really didn't have to prove your worth. It was fairly simple, fairly easy. I had built a rapport with the COO. I was someone she could count on. She started asking my opinion about revenue cycle, and she started pulling me into conversations. And I had never done revenue cycle, but I had heard enough. I had been around enough. What I didn't realize is that she was moving out the person who was over revenue cycle and positioning me over that as well. Because revenue cycle is a department that you push for numbers, you push for money, you push to bring money in. And I was good at pushing numbers. I was good at figuring it out. And here's the pattern that followed me my whole life, and a pattern my boss could count on. I never said no. I might have thrown a fit. I might say no at first, but I always ended up doing it. It wasn't her fault that she figured out that pattern. It was my fault for allowing that pattern to continue, because a system is always going to figure out patterns. And when a system figures out your pattern, the system is going to use that pattern as you allow it. And for me, I never said no, because what would happen if I wasn't indispensable? What would happen if I couldn't support my family? And that right there is verse 29 again, without me even quoting it. A fear-based system knows who will carry the weight, and I carried it. I could have chose not to carry it, but I never said no, even when I wanted to. This company had so many red flags that I ignored. The owner of the company was the biggest red flag, and I still ignored it. This owner was not ashamed to show his desire to be a dictator. At the corporate office, we all became numb to his shouting in the office. That abuse was just as normal as the feeling of fear we all carried. The owner thrived on power, fear, and control. And I'm only going to speak for me. I allowed it. I used to refer to us as his little minions, understanding verse 28 better. That verse says, I was chosen, but in that time of my life, I was acting like I was owned. I talked about him. I ranted about him. I cursed about him, but I stayed in that system. I bent the rules. I did things in secret, but I never left. And I think the part that bothers me so much is not that I was surviving in that system. It's that I was helping to keep it functioning. I was helping to keep it going. Why was I honoring the wrong thing? When orders came down, I carried them out. When fear rolled downhill, I managed it. When numbers had to be pushed, I pushed them. And during that time in my life, I can confidently say I was the biggest asshole there ever was. But I understand why now. Because when you survive in chaos long enough, you start creating it. In 2023, this company shut down. But not only did the company shut down, my nervous system went into full shutdown mode. I didn't really understand what was happening at that time. I thought I was just tired. I thought I was just drained, but it was literally my body shutting down. At that time, I was in my late 40s, now unemployed, collecting unemployment for the first time in my life. And ooh, that alone hurt my ego. The two activities that were prominent in my life right then was sleeping and drinking. I was drinking more than I ever had. And I disguised it as downtime. I disguised it as I'm relaxing. I disguised it as I've been working for this company for 20 years. Now it's my time just to take a break. But it was because I didn't have a job. And if I didn't have a job, what was I worth? And if I'm not serving, what am I worth? I was drinking to numb myself so I didn't have to think about it. During that time, I was still married, and I was also working on my master's degree. So I still had a few things that I could entertain myself with: cook, clean, study, show up in small ways. But man, I was losing interest. But I kept up appearances. I kept putting on a brave face, and I kept showing up. Because if I let someone know that I didn't have it all together, what would they think of me? Where would my worth be? How could I help them if I couldn't even help myself? And that's what my identity was: fixing, helping, saving. I woke up every day thinking the same thing: God, I can't do this anymore. And that was my verse 27 moment. God saying, have I not made myself clear? Because God had been clear in the red flags. God had been clear in the exhaustion. God had been clear in the patterns. God was even clear in my nervous system shut down, but I couldn't hear anything because I was just trying to survive. Survive in every single system that I was in. Through this whole journey in my career, in my jobs, I've learned something that I didn't understand then. God wasn't just entrusting me with leadership. God was entrusting me with me. Verse 28, God says, did I not choose you? And I can only answer yes. Yes, God, you chose me to lead, but I didn't understand that God also chose me to steward myself and the things I did. And I didn't fail because I was evil. I was surviving in patterns that I didn't understand. What's that old saying? Hurt people hurt people. That was me. That was me, and I didn't even realize it. I didn't realize it until God said, you've wandered around long enough. It's time, and I'm stepping in. And when God stepped in, I had to surrender myself, my nervous system, my identity, and everything I thought that made me worthy. And when I surrendered, I cried, I grieved, I rested, and I felt the damage. I felt the damage I had done to myself, and I felt the damage I had done to others while surviving those patterns, while surviving those systems. And understanding what I understand now, everything is a system. And if you don't understand the pattern that you bring to the system, you continue to repeat it. This last job that I had, it looked different. It sounded different. It was polished better. The culture felt better. It was a nonprofit. They used the slogan, the healing ministry of Jesus Christ. And on the outside, for me, it sounded aligned. It sounded holy. It sounded safe. But when I got into that system, it was still the same. Image over integrity. This system didn't have a dictator yelling down the hallway. It didn't have someone making you work all kinds of crazy hours. This system was polished, professional, wrapped in ministering language. But this system still thrived on power, control, and greed. And I had to ask myself, because that system didn't change what it was doing, I changed. That system was the same system that it's always been, but I wasn't the same person that I had always been. And so verse 29, it just sat there quietly and asked, why are you honoring the wrong thing? Because it looks better? Because it sounds better? Because it is using the name of Jesus? And then I had to ask myself, why do I keep finding myself in the same systems that are just dressed differently? Different name, different building, different leadership style, but the same fear-based system, the same hierarchy protecting itself, and the same pattern. Why do I continue to put myself in these patterns? Because I had to see that it wasn't just those systems. It was me. It was the pattern I kept stepping into. Why? Because it was familiar, because it fed something in me, because it felt safe, even when it wasn't aligned. Healing my nervous system, taking time for myself, it's done miracles for me. If someone were to say, "Have you ever seen a miracle?" I would answer, yes. I am my miracle. I am the miracle that I have seen. Because for the first time in my life, I stopped serving. I stopped proving. And I remembered God saying, "Did I not choose you? Did I not appoint you? Did I not give you honor?" And I started choosing myself. I started honoring myself. And when I started honoring and choosing myself, I stopped honoring the wrong things. I stopped honoring those patterns that kept me stuck in cycles, that kept me stuck in loops for decades of my life. When I started remembering God chose me, I started co-creating with God. I stopped trying to prove myself. I stopped feeding my ego. I stopped trying to keep myself indispensable. And I started being aligned with God and the plans that God has for me. God didn't specifically send us here so we could suffer or struggle. God didn't have a big laugh and say, "I'm going to send you to earth and I hope you make it." And yes, scripture talks about fractured creation. Scripture talks about other people's choices affecting us. And scripture talks about spiritual growth. And yes, struggle is a part of that spiritual growth. But I'm talking about accountability with patterns, accountability with choices, accountability of our actions. God didn't send us here to place obstacles in our way for entertainment purposes. We create our obstacles. We choose to struggle when we live out of alignment. We choose to struggle when we repeat patterns we refuse to see. We choose to struggle when we stay involved in broken systems. And we choose to struggle when we stay in places where we are not meant to be. And yes, choosing differently does not mean ease, but it does mean alignment. It means alignment with yourself, alignment with God, alignment with your purpose. And when you choose what is best for you, not what keeps everyone around you comfortable, but when you choose what is best for you, something shifts. When you co-create with God, instead of performing for approval, your world opens up. But at some point in your life, you must make the decision, am I going to keep surviving or am I going to heal? Because healing is not about blaming everyone else. Healing is about seeing your pattern Healing is about taking accountability of all your choices, even after the patterns are given to you. And healing is about choosing differently. Can you imagine if every single one of us lived in our actual purpose? If every single one of us lived in our authenticity? If every single one of us lived co-creating with God? If every single one of us decided we never wanted to live in fear again, we never wanted to perform again, and we never wanted to live our life with our ego face forward, can you imagine what this world would look like? Here's the question I'm going to leave you with today. Where in your life are you still honoring the wrong thing just because it has a different name?